Most people would walk past this penny without a second thought. But what if I told you that some 1957 Lincoln pennies have sold for more than a brand new car, and in rare cases, even more than that? The truth is, one small detail can turn an ordinary-looking coin into something collectors chase for decades. And today, you're about to find out why. This video is all about the 1957 Mint Mark Lincoln penny, a coin that millions of Americans once carried in their pockets, dropped into piggy banks, or spent on candy and soda. At first glance, it looks just like countless other Lincoln cents. But behind its simple design is a story of American history, craftsmanship, and hidden value that most people never realize. The 1957 penny was made in Denver, Colorado, during one of the busiest periods in U.S. coin production. By the late 1950s, America was booming. Families were buying homes, businesses were growing, and everyday transactions were happening at a faster pace than ever before. The U.S. Mint needed massive numbers of coins to keep up with demand, especially pennies, which were still widely used for small purchases. That year, the Denver Mint struck more than 1 billion Lincoln cents. Yes, over a billion. On the surface, that makes the 1957 penny seem common, and technically, many examples still exist today. But as with many coins, the real value isn't in how many were made. It's in how many survived in excellent condition, and how many carry rare details or mistakes that collectors prize. To understand this coin, let's take a moment to look at its design. On the front, or obverse, you'll see Abraham Lincoln, facing right. This portrait was first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. It was the first time a real person appeared on a circulating U.S. coin, and it changed American coin design forever. Above Lincoln's head is the word Liberty, and in front of his face is the date, 1957. Just beneath that date, you'll see a small letter D, which tells us the coin was made at the Denver Mint. That single letter is incredibly important because different mints can produce coins with different characteristics, values, and rarities. On the back of the coin, you'll find the famous wheat ear design. Two wheat stalks frame the words 1 cent and United States of America, with the phrase EPLURIBUS UNUM above. This design was used from 1909 to 1958, making the 1957 penny part of the final years of the classic wheat cent era. Just 1 year later, in 1959, the Lincoln Memorial would replace the wheat ears, ending a chapter in American coin history. Now let's talk about what this coin is made of, because the metal composition adds another layer to its story. The 1957 Lincoln penny is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. That gives it a rich reddish tone when freshly minted, which collectors call red. Over time, exposure to air and moisture causes copper to darken, turning brown or sometimes a mix of red and brown. Collectors care deeply about color. A bright red 1957 penny in pristine condition is far rarer than a brown one that's been circulating for decades. And that color difference alone can mean the difference between a coin worth a few cents and one worth hundreds, or even thousands of dollars. So if over a billion were made, why do collectors still care about this coin? The answer lies in condition, rarity within quality grades, and errors. Most 1957 pennies were heavily used. They were tossed into cash registers, scraped against other coins, dropped on sidewalks, and stored in jars for years. Very few survived without scratches, wear, or discoloration. That's why high-grade examples, especially those graded by professional services, are surprisingly scarce. In top condition, especially those graded MS67 or higher, the 1957 penny becomes a completely different coin in the eyes of collectors. Coins at that level show almost no visible marks, sharp details, and often retain much of their original red color. These are the kinds of coins that make headlines when they appear at auction. But condition alone isn't the only thing that makes this penny exciting. Errors play a major role too. During the minting process, mistakes can happen, and when they do, they often create some of the most valuable coins in existence. For the 1957 D penny, collectors look closely for doubled dies, repunched mint marks, off-center strikes, and other striking errors. One of the most famous types is the doubled die error. This happens when the coin die receives a doubled impression, causing parts of the design, especially the date or lettering, to appear doubled on the finished coin. On a true doubled die, the doubling looks strong and raised, not flat or shadowy. Another sought-after error involves repunched mint marks. In the 1950s, mint marks were punched into coin dies by hand, which sometimes resulted in the letter being stamped more than once. On some 1957 D pennies, the D mint mark shows signs of doubling or misalignment, creating a subtle but valuable variety. Off-center strikes are another possibility. These occur when the coin blank isn't properly aligned in the press, resulting in part of the design being cut off. While extreme off-center errors are rare, even moderate ones can command significant premiums from collectors. Now let's talk about real money, actual auction results, and what people have paid for this coin. In circulated condition, a typical 1957 D penny is usually worth just a few cents above face value. But when you move into higher grades, especially mint state examples, the story changes dramatically. A well-preserved 1957 D penny graded MS65 red can sell for anywhere from $10 to $30, depending on eye appeal and market demand. That might not sound life-changing, but remember, that's for a single penny that once bought almost nothing. At MS66 red, prices often jump to the $50 to $150 range. And at MS67 red, which is extremely difficult to find, auction prices have climbed into the thousands. In past sales, top-grade examples have reached over $4,000, and in some cases, even higher, depending on the coin's quality and the competition among bidders. Error coins can bring even more. A genuine doubled die or dramatic off-center strike can sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars, especially if the coin is in strong condition and authenticated by a professional grading service. So how do you know if your 1957 D penny is real and possibly valuable? First, check the date and mint mark. The date should read 1957, and just beneath it, you should see a small D that confirms it was struck in Denver. If there's no mint mark, then it was made in Philadelphia, and it's a different coin entirely. Next, examine the color. Bright red or red-brown pennies that still shine often have more collector interest than dark brown ones. But color alone doesn't guarantee value. Condition and originality matter just as much. Then look closely at the details. Use a magnifying glass if you have one. Check the date, the word Liberty, and the lettering on the reverse. If anything looks doubled, distorted, or unusual, you might have an error worth investigating further. Also inspect the edges and surface. Authentic 1957 D pennies should weigh about 3.11 grams and have a solid copper color, not silver or gray. If a coin looks unusually light, magnetic, or plated, it may be damaged or altered, not a valuable rarity. One of the best steps you can take is to compare your coin with images of certified examples online. And if you think you've found something special, having it evaluated by a professional grading service can protect you from fakes and give you a clear idea of its market value. Now let's explore some fun and surprising facts about the 1957 D penny. This coin comes from the final years of the wheat cent design, which many collectors consider the most beautiful and classic era of the Lincoln penny. The wheat ears symbolize America's agricultural roots and national strength, making these coins especially nostalgic for older generations. In 1957, the U.S. was deep into the Cold War era. Sputnik would be launched later that year, starting the space race. Elvis Presley was dominating music charts. Suburbs were expanding rapidly. And while all that was happening, billions of humble pennies like this one were quietly changing hands across the country, completely unaware that some would one day become collectibles. Another interesting fact is that because copper prices have risen over time, the metal content of older pennies like the 1957D is worth more than 1 cent, though melting them is illegal. Still, it adds to the sense that these coins represent a different era of American money, one that physically felt heavier and more solid than modern cents. Collectors also enjoy the challenge of finding high-grade examples of coins that were mass-produced. It's easy to find a worn 1957D penny. It's incredibly hard to find one that looks almost exactly as it did the day it left the mint. That challenge is part of the thrill. So why do collectors still love this coin today? Part of it is nostalgia. Many people grew up with wheat pennies in circulation. Finding one today feels like uncovering a small piece of childhood or history. Another reason is accessibility. Unlike ultra-rare gold coins that cost thousands just to get started, the 1957D penny allows beginners to enter the world of coin collecting affordably. You can find one in circulation, at flea markets, or in old jars at home, and still experience the excitement of hunting for a hidden gem. And then there's the possibility factor. Even though most examples are common, the idea that one rare error or high-grade specimen could be sitting unnoticed in a drawer somewhere keeps collectors searching. That sense of mystery is powerful. It turns ordinary pocket change into potential treasure. The 1957D penny also represents the end of an era. With the wheat cent design ending just 1 year later, coins like this serve as a bridge between early 20th century America and the modern age. They connect collectors to a time when money was made differently, handled differently, and often valued differently. So the next time you see a penny dated 1957 with a small D beneath the date, don't dismiss it too quickly. Hold it up to the light. Look at the color. Study the details. Because while most of these coins are simple keepsakes, a rare few are reminders that history, value, and surprise can all hide in the smallest places. And that's what makes the 1957D Lincoln penny so fascinating. It's not just a coin. It's a time capsule, a piece of American life from nearly 70 years ago. And for collectors, it's proof that even the most ordinary objects can become extraordinary if you know what to look for. So before you toss your spare change aside, take another look, because the next great discovery might already be sitting in your pocket. Most people walk past this penny every day without a second thought. But what if I told you a simple 1965 Lincoln cent, sitting quietly in a drawer or jar, could carry a story of national crisis, secret changes at the U.S. Mint and collector demand that still surprises people today? The coin we're talking about is the 1965 no mint mark Lincoln penny. At first glance, it looks ordinary. Abraham Lincoln's profile on the front, the familiar wheat-free design on the back. Nothing flashy, no silver shine, no dramatic markings. But behind this simple appearance is one of the most important transition years in American coin history, and that's what makes this penny so fascinating to collectors and everyday people alike. Let's start with what this coin actually is. The 1965 Lincoln cent was made in huge numbers, but unlike most earlier pennies, it carries no mint mark at all. That's because it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which traditionally didn't use mint marks on pennies during that era. So if you find a 1965 penny with no letter under the date, that's normal. But what's not normal is what was happening behind the scenes when this coin was produced. The year 1965 was one of the most dramatic moments in U.S. coinage history. America was facing a major coin shortage. People were hoarding silver coins because the metal inside them had become more valuable than their face value. Quarters, dimes, and half-dollars were disappearing from circulation. Vending machines didn't have change. Banks were running low. Everyday commerce was slowing down over something as small as coins. To solve the crisis, Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1965. This law changed the metal content of U.S. coins and reshaped American money forever. Silver was removed from circulating dimes and quarters, and the mint ramped up production to flood the economy with fresh coins. That's where the 1965 penny comes in. While pennies didn't contain silver, they were part of this massive production push to stabilize the nation's coin supply. In fact, the mint produced more pennies in 1965 than almost any year before it. Over 2 billion Lincoln cents were struck that year at the Philadelphia Mint alone. It was one of the largest single-year penny productions in U.S. history. These coins were rushed into circulation, meant to move fast, get used hard, and solve real-world problems. But even in mass production, small differences can make a big impact. The 1965 penny still used the traditional bronze composition of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. This was the last full decade before pennies began transitioning toward cheaper metals. So the 1965 cent represents one of the last generations of classic American copper pennies, with that warm reddish-brown tone collectors love. The front of the coin features Victor David Brenner's iconic portrait of Abraham Lincoln, first introduced in 1909 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. By 1965, this design had already been in use for over half a century, making it one of the longest-running designs in U.S. coinage history. Lincoln faces right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, liberty to the left, and the date to the right. The back of the coin, by this time, had already switched from the famous wheat stalk design to the Lincoln Memorial, which debuted in 1959. The Memorial Building stands in the center, with United States of America and 1 cent framing the image. If you look closely, you can even see Lincoln's statue inside the memorial, making this one of the few U.S. coins where the same person appears on both sides. Now, on its own, a typical worn 1965 penny is only worth face value. But that's not where the story ends. Because of how fast and carelessly many of these coins were produced, errors and unusual varieties began to slip through. And that's where things start to get interesting. Some 1965 pennies were struck off-center, meaning the design appears shifted to one side, leaving part of the coin blank. Others show doubled die errors, where parts of the lettering or date appear doubled due to a misalignment during the minting process. These aren't obvious at first glance, but under magnification, they can stand out clearly. And when they do, collectors take notice. Another fascinating category involves planchet errors. A planchet is the blank metal disc used before a coin is struck. Some 1965 pennies were accidentally struck on the wrong type of metal blank, including rare experimental or foreign planchets. These mistakes are extremely rare and can turn an ordinary penny into a 4-figure or even 5-figure collectible, depending on the error type and condition. But even without dramatic errors, condition alone can make a major difference. Most 1965 pennies circulated heavily and lost their original shine, but a small percentage were saved immediately after minting, especially by collectors who recognized 1965 as a historic year for U.S. coinage. These coins remain in mint state condition, with full original luster and sharp details. High-grade examples of the 1965 Lincoln penny, especially those certified by professional grading services, can sell for surprising amounts. In top grades, especially those labeled as red, meaning they retain their original copper color, prices can reach several $100s. Some near-perfect specimens have sold for over $1,000 at auction. And then there are the true standouts. Certain rare error examples from 1965 have sold for tens of thousands of dollars. One dramatic off-metal strike from this year sold for more than the price of a used car. These coins are not common, but they do exist, and they've been found in circulation, estate collections, and old coin jars. So how do you know if your 1965 penny might be special? First, look at the date and mint mark area. A genuine 1965 penny will have no mint mark beneath the date. That's normal. If you see a D or S on a 1965 penny, that's a red flag because Denver and San Francisco did not strike pennies for circulation that year. Any mint-marked 1965 cent should be examined closely, as it may be altered or counterfeit. Next, examine the weight. A standard 1965 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. If it weighs significantly more or less, it could be struck on the wrong planchet, which is one of the most valuable types of errors. Then look closely at the lettering and numbers, especially the date and the word Liberty. If they appear doubled or blurred in a consistent direction, not just from wear, that could indicate a double die variety. Also, check the edges and surface. Cracks, missing areas, or unusual textures may point to mint errors. But remember, damage from circulation or the environment can look similar, so professional evaluation is often needed to confirm authenticity. One of the easiest ways to spot potential value is to look at color and shine. If your 1965 penny still has a bright reddish copper color with minimal wear, it could be worth setting aside. Many collectors focus on red examples because copper darkens over time, and preserving that original tone is difficult. Now here's a surprising fact. Even though more than 2 billion 1965 pennies were made, truly high-grade examples are much rarer than you might think. Most coins were immediately put into circulation during the coin shortage and were heavily used. Very few people saved rolls of pennies in 1965 compared to earlier decades. As a result, pristine examples today are far scarcer than their massive production numbers suggest. Another fascinating detail is that during this period, the U.S. Mint temporarily removed mint marks from most coins, not just pennies, to discourage hoarding. Officials believed people were saving coins from certain mints as souvenirs, worsening the coin shortage. So, for several years, including 1965, mint marks disappeared almost entirely from American coins. That makes this penny part of a unique chapter in U.S. monetary history. Collectors today love the 1965 Lincoln penny because it represents the crossroads between old and new American coinage. It was made during a national crisis, struck in enormous numbers under intense pressure, and released into circulation during one of the most chaotic periods in modern U.S. monetary history. It's not just a coin, it's a time capsule, and despite its humble face value, this penny still has the power to surprise. Every year, people discover rare error examples in old collections, inherited jars, and forgotten coin rolls. Some of these finds turn into life-changing moments, while others simply reconnect people to history in a personal way. Here's something else most people don't realize. The copper in these older pennies is now worth more than 1 cent. That doesn't mean you can legally melt them for profit, but it does highlight how much the world has changed since 1965. Back then, copper was cheap and plentiful. Today, it's a valuable industrial metal. That makes every Pennies 1,982 penny, including the 1965 cent, a small piece of real American copper history. Collectors also appreciate how easy this coin is to find. You don't need to attend elite auctions or spend thousands of dollars to start exploring this year. You can still find 1965 pennies in circulation today, mixed in with modern coins, unnoticed by most people. That accessibility makes it perfect for beginners, families, and anyone curious about coin collecting. And yet, hidden among those ordinary examples are rare survivors in stunning condition, error coins that escaped quality control, and unusual strikes that tell stories no textbook ever could. That sense of possibility is what keeps collectors searching. One of the most exciting things about the 1965 penny is that it proves valuable coins don't always look valuable. There's no gold shine, no silver sparkle, no obvious sign of wealth. It looks just like any other penny. But value in coin collecting isn't about appearance alone. It's about rarity, condition, history, and demand. And this coin quietly checks all four boxes, depending on the example. Even professional numismatists, people who study coins for a living, consider the mid-1960s one of the most important periods in modern U.S. minting history. The changes made during these years still affect every coin in your pocket today. And the 1965 Lincoln penny sits right at the center of that transformation. So the next time you see a penny dated 1965, don't dismiss it. Turn it over. Look closely. Check the edges. Study the letters. You might be holding a piece of history that survived one of the most dramatic transitions in American money. And even if your coin turns out to be worth only 1 cent, the story behind it is worth far more. It's the story of a nation scrambling to keep commerce moving, of a mint working overtime to supply billions of coins, and of everyday people unknowingly carrying history in their pockets. That's what makes the 1965 no-mint mark Lincoln penny special. Not because everyone is rare, but because some of them are, and because all of them represent a moment when American money changed forever. So before you toss that penny aside or drop it into a jar, take a closer look. Because sometimes, the most ordinary-looking coins carry the most extraordinary stories. Most people would walk right past this penny without a second thought. But what if I told you that a small copper coin from 1967 could be hiding a story connected to one of the most unusual moments in U.S. mint history, and in rare cases, worth far more than 1 cent? Today, we're uncovering the truth behind the 1967 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that millions of Americans have handled, but very few have ever truly understood. This coin is officially called the 1967 Lincoln Memorial Cent. It features President Abraham Lincoln on the front and the Lincoln Memorial on the back. Unlike many coins, this one carries no mint mark at all, and that detail alone opens the door to one of the most fascinating chapters in American coinage. At first glance, it looks ordinary, but once you know what to look for, this penny becomes something very different. A coin shaped by national crisis, hidden errors, and collector demand that continues more than half a century later. To understand this penny, we need to travel back to the mid-1960s, a time when the United States was facing a serious coin shortage. Vending machines were everywhere. Parking meters, pay phones, soda machines, laundromats, they all depended on coins. But Americans had started hoarding silver coins because the silver inside them was becoming more valuable than their face value. As coins disappeared from circulation, everyday commerce began to suffer. The U.S. Mint had to act fast. In 1965, Congress passed emergency legislation allowing the mint to remove mint marks and freeze coin dates temporarily. The idea was simple: discourage collectors from pulling coins out of circulation and get as many coins into the economy as possible. As a result, every Lincoln cent from 1965 through 1967 was struck without a mint mark, even those made in Denver and San Francisco. That's why the 1967 penny doesn't show a D or an S. All of them appear blank beneath the date, even though they were produced at multiple mints. This makes the 1967 penny one of the few coins in modern U.S. history where mint marks were intentionally eliminated, not by accident, but by national policy. And that alone makes this coin historically special. In 1967, the U.S. Mint produced over 3 billion Lincoln cents. That's billion with a B. These pennies flooded into circulation and became everyday pocket change almost instantly. Most Americans alive today have probably handled one without realizing it. The design of the coin was already familiar by then. Abraham Lincoln's portrait, first introduced in 1909, was still on the front. On the back was the Lincoln Memorial, which replaced the wheat stalk design in 1959 to mark Lincoln's 150th birthday. But the metal composition is where things get interesting. The 1967 penny is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc. That high copper content gives the coin its warm, reddish tone when new, and it also gives the coin intrinsic metal value, especially when copper prices rise. Later pennies would switch to mostly zinc in the 1980s, but 1967 pennies still belong to the classic solid copper era. That means every genuine 1967 penny weighs about 3.11 grams and has a solid feel in the hand that modern pennies simply don't. Now let's talk about what really excites collectors: errors, varieties, and condition. Most 1967 pennies are common in worn condition, but certain examples stand out, and some are genuinely rare. One of the most desirable types is the 1967 penny with strong doubling in the lettering or date, known as a double die error. These occur when the die used to strike the coin receives a misaligned impression during production, causing parts of the design to appear doubled. On some 1967 pennies, you can see doubling on the word Liberty, the motto "In God We Trust," or the date itself. These aren't scratches. They aren't damage. They're real mint errors, and collectors pay serious money for them. Another sought-after category is off-center strikes. These happen when the coin blank isn't properly aligned during striking, resulting in part of the design missing. Some off-center 1967 pennies show dramatic misalignment, yet still retain the date, which greatly increases their value. Then there are clipped planchets, where part of the metal blank was cut incorrectly before striking, leaving a curved or straight-edge gap in the coin. These errors are uncommon, and when genuine, they're highly collectible. But even without errors, condition alone can make a huge difference. Most 1967 pennies today are brown, meaning their copper surface has oxidized over time, but some examples still retain their original red luster. These are called red coins by collectors, and they're far more desirable than brown or red-brown examples. A bright red 1967 penny that has never circulated, with full mint luster and no marks, can be worth dozens or even hundreds of dollars, despite being struck in the billions. Now let's talk real-world value. A typical circulated 1967 penny is usually worth about 1 to 5 cents, basically face value, maybe slightly more for copper content. But uncirculated examples tell a very different story. A 1967 penny graded MS65, read by a professional grading service, has sold for around $25 to $40. Higher grade examples, such as MS66 red, have reached $75 to $150. And at the top of the condition scale, near-perfect MS67 red examples have sold at auction for over $500. That's right, a penny you could once get in change has sold for more than $500 simply because it survived in flawless condition. Error coins can go even higher. A genuine 1967 double die penny can sell anywhere from $100 to over $1,000, depending on strength and preservation. Off-center strikes and dramatic mint errors have also sold in the hundreds, and these prices continue to rise as collectors compete for top-quality survivors from the copper era. So how do you tell if your 1967 penny is real, valuable, or just ordinary? First, check the date. It should read 1967, and there should be no mint mark under the date, not a D, not an S, nothing at all. That's normal for this year. Next, weigh the coin. A genuine copper 1967 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. If it's significantly lighter, it may be damaged or altered. Then examine the surface. Look for doubling in the letters, especially on Liberty and In God We Trust. Use a magnifying glass or phone camera zoom. Real doubling looks raised and rounded, not flat or scratched. Check the edges for smooth curves or missing sections that might indicate clipped planchets or striking errors. Also look at color. Bright red copper with full shine is much rarer than dull brown. Coins stored in rolls, albums, or sealed containers tend to preserve their color better. One important thing: genuine 1967 pennies should not stick to a magnet. Copper is not magnetic. If your coin sticks, something is wrong. As for counterfeits, full fake pennies are extremely rare for this year because the coin itself isn't normally expensive. But altered coins do exist, especially fake doubled dies created by damage or tools. That's why true doubled dies show rounded edges and consistent doubling across letters, not random distortions. If you believe you've found something special, professional grading services like PCGS or NGC can authenticate and grade your coin. Now let's talk about some fascinating facts that make this penny even more interesting. First, the 1967 penny was struck during the final years of the original copper era. By the early 1970s, copper prices were rising, and by 1982, the mint would permanently change to copper-plated zinc pennies. That makes every 1967 penny a solid piece of classic American copper coinage. Second, this coin was produced during one of the few periods in U.S. history when mint marks were completely removed across all denominations. That policy lasted only 3 years, 1965, 1966, and 1967, making these coins forever tied to a unique national moment. Third, while billions were made, very few survive today in top condition. Most entered circulation immediately, where they were exposed to moisture, friction, and handling. Finding a blazing red, scratch-free 1967 penny today is surprisingly difficult. Fourth, many collectors who grew up in the 1960s now actively search for coins from their childhood, and 1967 sits right in the middle of that nostalgia era. That emotional connection drives demand, especially for pristine examples. Another surprising detail: the Lincoln Memorial design on the back actually contains a tiny image of Lincoln seated inside the building. With enough magnification, you can see his statue through the columns, making this one of the few U.S. coins to feature the same person on both sides. Now let's talk about why collectors still love this coin today. Part of it is history. This penny represents a time when the U.S. Mint had to take extraordinary action to stabilize the economy. It tells the story of a nation adjusting to modern commerce, rising metal prices, and massive demand for everyday money. Part of it is accessibility. Unlike rare gold coins or early silver dollars, the 1967 penny is something almost anyone might already own. That sense of discovery, finding value in something ordinary, is one of the most powerful emotions in coin collecting. And part of it is challenge. Finding a truly flawless red 1967 penny or a genuine doubled die requires patience, sharp eyes, and sometimes luck. That hunt keeps collectors engaged. There's also something deeply satisfying about holding a coin that's over half a century old and realizing it still carries the same design, weight, and history it had when it passed through someone's hands in 1967. It might have bought a soda, it might have dropped into a jukebox, it might have paid for a phone call, or it might have sat untouched in a drawer waiting decades to be rediscovered. And that's the real magic of coins like this. They're time travelers. They connect us to moments we never lived, people we never met, and decisions made long before we were born, all in something small enough to fit in your pocket. So the next time you see a penny dated 1967, don't dismiss it. Turn it over, check the color, look at the letters, weigh it, magnify it. Because while most are ordinary, a few are extraordinary, and those few can turn spare change into something genuinely special. And who knows? The next valuable coin story might not come from an auction house, a vault, or a museum. It might come from your own pocket. Most people would walk right past this coin without a second glance. It looks ordinary, common, almost invisible. But what if I told you that a single penny from 1973, sitting quietly in a jar or drawer, could be worth far more than 1 cent, and in rare cases, hundreds or even thousands of dollars? Today, we're uncovering the real story behind the 1973 no-mint mark Lincoln penny and why collectors still search for it more than 50 years later. Let's start with what this coin actually is. The 1973 Lincoln penny with no mint mark was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. At that time, Philadelphia did not place mint marks on cents, so a blank space under the date simply meant the coin was made there. These pennies were produced in massive numbers and entered circulation during a time when America was going through major social and economic changes. On the surface, this coin looks like any other Lincoln cent, but when you understand its history, its composition, and the rare mistakes that slip through production, it becomes something far more interesting. To understand this coin, we need to go back to the early 1970s. In 1973, the United States was dealing with inflation, rising fuel prices, and a changing economy. The country was also in the middle of a major shift in coin production. Just 1 year earlier, in 1971, the U.S. Mint had moved away from silver in circulating coins, and by the early 1970s, even copper was becoming expensive. This would soon lead to dramatic changes in penny composition, but in 1973, the Lincoln cent was still made mostly of copper. That makes the 1973 penny part of the final era of classic copper cents. It weighs 3.11 grams and is composed of 95% copper, with the remaining 5% made of zinc and tin. Just 9 years later, in 1982, the mint would switch to copper-plated zinc pennies, making coins like the 1973 cent part of a fading chapter in American coinage. The design of the coin had already become iconic. On the front, or obverse, we see Abraham Lincoln's portrait, first introduced in 1909 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of his birth. It was the first time a real person appeared on a regularly circulating U.S. coin, and that decision forever changed American currency. Above Lincoln's head is the word Liberty. Behind him is the motto In God We Trust, and just below is the date, 1973. On the back, the reverse design features the Lincoln Memorial, which replaced the wheat ears design in 1959. Inside the memorial, if you look closely enough, you can actually see a tiny statue of Lincoln sitting between the columns. This level of detail was remarkable for a 1-cent coin, and it remains one of the most admired designs in U.S. numismatic history. At first glance, nothing about the 1973 no-mint mark penny seems unusual. Millions were struck, most circulated heavily. Many are still sitting in change jars today. So why do collectors care about it? The answer lies in condition, errors, and the surprising number of rare variations that slipped through production during this year. The Philadelphia Mint struck more than 4.3 billion Lincoln cents in 1973. That's billion with a B. With numbers like that, you might assume every example is common and nearly worthless. And in circulated condition, most are indeed only worth face value. But here's where things change. Coins are not valued only by age or rarity. Condition plays a massive role. A 1973 penny that was pulled straight from a mint roll and never circulated can look dramatically different from one that spent decades bouncing around pockets and cash registers. In pristine, uncirculated condition, especially with strong luster and sharp details, these coins can sell for several dollars, and in rare top-grade examples much more. But the real excitement comes from mint errors. The 1970s were a busy time for the U.S. Mint. High production volumes meant that mistakes happened, and some of those mistakes ended up on 1973 pennies. One of the most sought-after varieties is the 1973 double die obverse. A double die occurs when the coin die receives multiple misaligned impressions during manufacturing. This causes parts of the design, such as the date or lettering, to appear doubled. On some 1973 pennies, collectors have found doubling in the word Liberty, the motto In God We Trust, or even in Lincoln's profile. These are not simple wear marks or machine doubling. True double dies show clear separation and thickness in the letters, and when authenticated, they can be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars depending on condition. Another important error is the off-center strike. This happens when the coin blank isn't properly seated in the press, causing part of the design to be missing or pushed off the edge. A dramatic off-center strike that still shows the full date can be extremely collectible. Some 1973 off-center pennies have sold for over $100, even in circulated condition. Then there are broad strikes, where the coin is struck without the collar that normally shapes its edge. These coins come out wider than normal and lack a raised rim. While not as valuable as double dies, they still carry strong collector interest. You can also find clipped planchets, where part of the metal blank was missing before striking. These create crescent-shaped gaps along the edge and are another legitimate mint error that collectors actively seek. And finally, there are wrong planchet errors, coins struck on metal intended for other denominations. These are extremely rare, but when they happen, they can be worth thousands. While confirmed examples of 1973 pennies on wrong planchets are scarce, they do exist in the broader Lincoln cent series, and collectors always keep an eye out. So how much can a 1973 no mint mark penny actually be worth? In everyday circulated condition, most examples are worth about 1 cent to maybe 5 cents. But uncirculated coins tell a very different story. A standard 1973 penny in mint state 65 condition can sell for around $5 to $10. Higher grade examples in mint state 67 or above have sold at auction for well over $100. In fact, some of the finest known examples have crossed the four-figure mark when demand was high and competition among collectors was strong. Now let's talk about error coins. A verified 1973 double die obverse penny can sell anywhere from $200 to over $2,000, depending on strength of doubling and overall condition. One example graded in high mint state sold at auction for more than $3,000, shocking collectors who never expected a 1970s penny to reach that level. Off-center strikes can range from $50 to several hundred, depending on how dramatic the misalignment is and whether the date is still visible. Broad strikes and clipped planchets typically sell between $30 and $150. And if someone were ever to discover a genuine 1973 penny struck on a wrong planchet, especially silver or aluminum, the value could reach several $1,000s or more, depending on rarity and authentication. Now let's talk about how to identify a real 1973 no mint mark penny and how to avoid mistaking damage for a valuable error. First, check the date and mint mark. A genuine Philadelphia penny from 1973 will show the date 1973 with no letter below it. If you see a D or S, it was minted in Denver or San Francisco, which are different coins entirely. Next, weigh the coin. A normal 1973 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. If it weighs significantly more or less, that could be a clue that something unusual is going on, especially with wrong planchet errors. Then look closely at the lettering and numbers using a magnifying glass or coin loop. True double die errors show clean, rounded doubling that looks like a shadow image next to the original letters. Flat or shelf-like doubling is usually machine doubling, which carries little or no premium. Check the edges. A broad strike will look wider than normal and lack a raised rim. A clipped planchet will show a curved missing section, often with metal flow lines pointing toward the missing area. And finally, examine the surface. Damage from tools, heat, or chemicals can make a coin look unusual, but these are not mint errors and usually reduce value. True errors happen during the minting process, and their features are consistent and repeatable. If you think you found something special, the safest step is to have the coin authenticated by a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC. Authentication protects you from counterfeits and ensures the coin's value is recognized by collectors and dealers. Now let's explore some fascinating facts about the 1973 penny that most people don't know. First, this coin comes from one of the final years of nearly pure copper US cents. In just 9 years, rising copper prices would force the mint to change the composition forever. That makes the 1973 penny part of the last generation of traditional heavy copper coins. Second, although billions were struck, truly flawless examples are incredibly rare. Coins that survive decades without scratches, stains, or wear are far harder to find than most people realize. That's why top-graded 1973 pennies can command surprising prices. Third, many collectors today specifically target 1970s Lincoln cents because they represent an overlooked era. These coins are old enough to feel historical, yet modern enough that many people still have them in circulation, making the hunt both exciting and realistic. Fourth, some 1973 pennies have been found in sealed bank rolls that sat untouched for decades. When these rolls are opened, collectors sometimes discover stunning uncirculated coins or rare varieties that had never been seen before. And here's a surprising detail. Even small differences in color can affect value. A bright red copper surface is much more desirable than a dull brown one. Collectors classify copper pennies as red, red-brown, or brown, and a red 1973 penny in high grade can be worth many times more than a brown one in the same condition. So why do collectors love this coin today? Because it represents the perfect balance between accessibility and potential. Unlike ultra-rare coins that most people will never own, the 1973 no mint mark penny is something many people already have. It creates the thrill of possibility. Every time someone checks their pocket change or old coin jar, there's a chance, however small, that they might discover a rare error or a pristine example worth far more than expected. Collectors also love the historical connection. This coin comes from a time when America was changing rapidly, and yet the Lincoln cent remained a constant, passing through millions of hands during daily life. It's a quiet witness to history, commerce, and everyday moments. And perhaps most importantly, the 1973 penny reminds collectors that value isn't always obvious. Some of the most exciting discoveries come from coins that were never meant to be special, never saved intentionally, and never expected to matter. Yet decades later, they become treasures. If you have a 1973 no mint mark penny, the best thing you can do is take a closer look. Examine the date, the lettering, the edges, and the surface. Check the weight if you can. Compare it to images of known error coins. And if something looks unusual, don't dismiss it. Some of the most valuable coins ever found were discovered by ordinary people doing exactly that. Even if your coin turns out to be worth only a cent or two, it still holds something special. It's a piece of American history. It's part of the last copper generation. And it's proof that sometimes, the most ordinary-looking objects carry stories far richer than we expect. So the next time you see a penny dated 1973 with no mint mark, don't ignore it. Don't toss it aside. Hold it in your hand for a moment. Look closely, because hidden in that small copper circle might be a rare error, a collector-grade survivor, or at the very least, a connection to a time when every cent still carried the weight of real copper and real possibility. And who knows? The next life-changing coin discovery might already be sitting quietly in your pocket, waiting to be noticed. Most people would walk right past this coin without a second thought. But what if I told you that a single penny from 1978 could be sitting in your pocket right now, and collectors across America are quietly hunting for it? This is the story of the 1978 no mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary at first glance, but holds a fascinating place in U.S. history, and in some rare cases, real collector value. Let's start with what this coin actually is. The 1978 no mint mark Lincoln cent was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which, at the time, did not place mint marks on most pennies. So if your 1978 penny has no letter under the date, that means it was made in Philadelphia. Over 5.5 billion pennies were struck that year, making it one of the most widely produced coins in American history. But here's where it gets interesting. Even when a coin is common, certain versions can become rare, valuable, and highly sought after, and this penny is no exception. To understand why, we need to go back to the late 1970s. America in 1978 was a country in transition. Inflation was rising, energy prices were unstable, and the U.S. Mint was facing a serious problem. Copper was becoming too expensive. Pennies were still being made mostly of copper, and it was costing the government almost as much to make a penny as the coin was worth. The 1978 Lincoln cent became one of the final years before a major change in American coinage. Just 4 years later, in 1982, the U.S. Mint would switch pennies from mostly copper to mostly zinc. That makes the 1978 penny one of the last true copper-era Lincoln cents, and that alone gives it historical importance. The design on the front features Abraham Lincoln, just as it had since 1909, marking the 69th year of the Lincoln cent. This makes it the longest-running portrait design in U.S. coin history. On the reverse side, the coin shows the Lincoln Memorial, which had replaced the wheat stalks design in 1959. So when you hold a 1978 penny, you're holding a piece of American history that connects the nation's bicentennial decade to the final years of traditional copper coinage. Now let's talk about what makes this coin special beyond its history. The 1978 no mint mark penny is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc, giving it a warm reddish tone when new. Fresh examples often glow with a rich copper shine, while circulated coins turn brown over time. It weighs about 3.11 grams, which is heavier than modern pennies made after 1982. That difference alone makes it easy to identify when compared side by side with newer cents. The details on the coin include Lincoln's profile facing right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date to the right. On the back, the Lincoln Memorial appears with the words "United States of America" at the top, 1 cent at the bottom, and "E pluribus unum" above the building. But collectors aren't just interested in standard examples. They're searching for something far more exciting: errors and high-grade specimens. That's where this penny becomes truly interesting. Even though billions were made, some 1978 pennies were struck with mistakes. And when errors slip through quality control, collectors pay attention. One of the most valuable varieties is the 1978 double die obverse. This error happens when the coin die receives a misaligned second impression, causing doubling in the lettering or date. On some examples, the doubling can be seen clearly on the words "In God We Trust," "Liberty," and the numbers in the date. These double die pennies can sell for hundreds, and in top condition, even thousands of dollars. Another collectible variety is the off-center strike. This occurs when the blank coin isn't positioned correctly during striking, leaving part of the design missing. If the date is still visible and the error is dramatic, collectors love them. There are also clipped planchet errors, where part of the coin is missing because the metal strip was improperly cut. These are rare and very popular. Then there are broad strikes, where the coin spreads wider than normal because it wasn't properly held in place during striking. Each of these errors turns a normal penny into something special, and sometimes extremely valuable. But even without errors, condition matters more than most people realize. Most 1978 pennies were heavily circulated. They were used in vending machines, pocket change, school lunches, and everyday purchases. Over time, the copper surfaces wore down, scratches formed, and the bright shine disappeared. But a small number were saved in mint condition, coins that never entered circulation and still look nearly perfect today. These are called uncirculated or mint state coins, and they're graded on a scale from 60 to 70, with 70 being flawless. Here's where the real value jumps. A worn 1978 penny is usually worth just 1 cent. A lightly circulated one might be worth 2 or 3 cents. But a high-grade, uncirculated example can be worth several dollars. And at the very top of the scale, the numbers get much bigger. In recent years, professional coin grading services have certified 1978 no-mint mark pennies in grades of M-67 and above. Some of these coins have sold at auction for hundreds of dollars. One particularly sharp example, graded M-67 red, sold for over $1,000 at a major coin auction, simply because of its flawless surface, strong strike, and blazing copper color. That's a 1-cent coin turning into a 4-figure collectible without any errors at all. And if you combine mint condition with a rare error, values can go much higher. Verified 1978 double-die pennies have sold for anywhere from $300 to over $3,000 depending on the strength of the doubling and the coin's condition. These aren't fantasy numbers. These are real results from real collectors. Now let's talk about how you can tell if you have a valuable one. First, check under the date. If there's no mint mark, it means Philadelphia. That's correct for this coin, but it's the starting point. Next, look closely at the date and lettering using a magnifying glass. You're searching for doubling, especially on In God We Trust, Liberty, and the numbers in 1978. True doubling looks like a shadow image, not blurry edges from wear. Then examine the coin's surface. A valuable coin will have clean fields, strong details in Lincoln's hair and beard, and sharp lines in the Lincoln Memorial. The fewer scratches and marks, the better. Next, weigh the coin if possible. A genuine 1978 penny should weigh around 3.11 grams. If it weighs significantly less, it could be damaged or altered. Finally, consider color. Bright red copper coins are more valuable than brown ones, assuming they're original and not artificially cleaned. And here's something important: never clean your coins. Cleaning removes original surfaces and can destroy collector value instantly. A cleaned coin that might have been worth $200 can drop to just a few cents. Now let's talk about fakes, because yes, even pennies can be faked. Most fake 1978 pennies involve altered dates or added mint marks, though since this coin naturally has no mint mark, altered examples are less common. Still, some people try to modify coins to mimic error varieties. If you believe you have a rare or valuable 1978 penny, the safest move is to have it authenticated by a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC. Now for some surprising facts. Did you know the U.S. Mint produced more pennies in 1978 than almost any other year in history? Over 5.6 billion coins were struck in Philadelphia alone. That means statistically, almost every American has handled one at some point, even if they didn't realize it. Another fun fact is that some 1978 pennies were struck using worn dies, leading to weak or missing details. While most of these are considered minor flaws, some collectors actively seek them out as examples of late-stage die wear. Also, the copper in a single 1978 penny is now worth close to its face value due to metal prices. That's one reason pennies are rarely spent today, and why copper cents like this one are slowly disappearing from circulation. And here's something else fascinating. Collectors often say the 1978 penny represents the end of an era. It's one of the final chapters in the long story of traditional American copper coinage, a story that began in 1793 and quietly ended in the early 1980s. That gives this coin emotional and historical weight beyond its market value. So why do collectors love this coin today? Because it sits at the crossroads of history, accessibility, and potential discovery. It's common enough that anyone can find one in old jars, rolls, or inherited collections, but rare enough in high grades or error varieties to make searching exciting. It's affordable for beginners, yet respected by advanced collectors. and it carries real historical meaning as part of America's shift in coin production. For many collectors, the thrill isn't just in owning a valuable coin, it's in finding one, opening a jar of old pennies, and discovering a bright red 1978 coin in near-perfect condition feels like uncovering buried treasure. Finding a double-die variety feels even better. And because this coin is still within reach of everyday people, it continues to attract new collectors every year. Now imagine this. Somewhere in a desk drawer, coffee can, or old coin roll, there could be a 1978 penny worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And the person who owns it may not even realize it yet. That's what makes coins like this so powerful. They remind us that history isn't always locked in museums. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, small, quiet, and overlooked, waiting for someone curious enough to take a closer look. So the next time you see a copper penny with the date 1978 and no mint mark, don't dismiss it. Hold it, study it, because that tiny coin might be more than just spare change. It might be a surviving piece of America's copper past, or even a rare collectible hiding in your pocket. And who knows, the next time you check your change, you might just discover that history and value has been sitting in your hands all along. What if the next penny you pick up from your change jar is quietly worth far more than 1 cent, and almost nobody notices it? Today, we're uncovering the true story behind the 1981 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary but holds some surprising secrets collectors love. The 1981 Lincoln penny with no mint mark was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which traditionally did not use mint marks on pennies until 2017. That means if your 1981 penny has no letter under the date, it came from Philadelphia. At first glance, it looks just like millions of other pennies. Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the front, the Lincoln Memorial on the back, but hidden in that simplicity is a fascinating moment in American coin history. This penny was made during a major transition period in U.S. coinage. By the early 1980s, the cost of copper was rising fast. For decades, Lincoln pennies had been made of 95% copper, giving them their familiar weight and warm reddish tone. But in 1982, the U.S. Mint would change the penny forever by switching to a copper-plated zinc core to save money. That makes 1981 one of the final years of the classic solid copper Lincoln cent. So this coin represents the end of an era. It belongs to the last chapter of traditional copper pennies that began in 1909, when the Lincoln cent was first introduced to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. By 1981, the Lincoln Memorial reverse design had already been in circulation for more than 20 years, having replaced the wheat ears design in 1959. This design showed the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and if you look closely, you can even see Lincoln seated inside the memorial. In 1981, the United States was going through big changes. Inflation had hit hard in the late 1970s, and Americans were feeling the impact of rising prices everywhere, including in everyday coins. The mint was under pressure to reduce production costs, and the penny became a major focus. But for this one final full year, pennies were still made the old way, solid copper, heavy in the hand, and built to last. The 1981 no-mint mark Lincoln penny weighs about 3.11 grams and is composed of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. Its diameter is 19 millimeters, and it has a smooth edge. On the front, you'll see Lincoln facing right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date to the right. On the reverse, you'll see the Lincoln Memorial with "United States of America" and 1 cent above and below. Most people don't realize that billions of pennies were minted in 1981. The Philadelphia Mint alone produced well over 700 million of them. That huge number means most 1981 no-mint mark pennies are very common and usually worth just 1 or 2 cents in everyday condition. But here's where things get interesting. Not all 1981 pennies are created equal. Some were struck with unusually strong detail, others with weak strikes. Some escape the mint with errors, and those errors are where serious collector value can begin. One of the most desirable errors on 1981 pennies is the double die variety. A double die occurs when the coin die itself is misaligned during manufacturing, causing letters or numbers to appear doubled. On a genuine double die, you may see clear doubling on the date, the word Liberty, or In God We Trust. These are not small scratches or blurry marks. They look like real, separated impressions of the design. Another error collectors hunt for is off-center strikes. This happens when the blank planchet is not properly aligned in the coining press, causing part of the design to be missing and blank metal to appear on one side. Depending on how dramatic the shift is, and whether the date is still visible, off-center 1981 pennies can be worth anywhere from $10 to several $100s. There are also broad strikes, where the coin was struck outside the retaining collar, causing it to spread wider than normal with no raised rim. These too can carry premium value, especially in strong condition. Die cracks, cuds, and clipped planchets are other error types collectors watch for. A clipped planchet occurs when a piece of metal is missing from the coin blank before striking, leaving a curved or straight cut along the edge. Even small clips can increase a penny's value several times over face value. But errors aren't the only way a 1981 no-mint mark penny can become valuable. Condition matters a lot. Most pennies enter circulation quickly and pick up scratches, stains, and wear. But some coins were carefully preserved in rolls, mint sets, or collections and remain in nearly perfect condition decades later. In coin grading, the highest levels are known as mint state, especially M. 67 and above. These coins show full original luster, no visible wear, and very few contact marks even under magnification. Finding a 1981 penny in that kind of condition is surprisingly difficult, and collectors are willing to pay for quality. One example, a 1981 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, graded M. 67 red by a major grading service, sold at auction for over $1,000. Another example in M. 66 red has sold for several $100s. These prices may surprise people who think of pennies as worthless pocket change, but in numismatics, condition and rarity at the top end matter far more than mintage numbers. What about everyday circulated examples? Most worn 1981 pennies are worth 1 to 3 cents, but if you find one that's bright, clean, and sharply struck, it could be worth 10 to 25 cents, sometimes more if it has attractive toning or exceptional detail. Now let's talk about how to identify a real 1981 no-mint mark penny and how to avoid being fooled by altered coins. First, look under the date on the front of the coin. If there's no letter, it's from Philadelphia. If you see a D, it was minted in Denver, and if you see an S, it came from San Francisco, usually in proof form. A true no-mint mark 1981 penny will have nothing below the date. Next, weigh the coin. A genuine copper 1981 penny should weigh around 3.11 grams. Small variations are normal, but if it's significantly lighter, around 2.5 grams, it may be a zinc penny from 1982 or later, or possibly damaged. Check the color and sound. Copper pennies tend to have a warmer, richer tone and make a slightly deeper sound when dropped compared to zinc-based cents. If you suspect doubling or an error, use a magnifying glass or phone camera zoom. True double dies show clear, separated images, not fuzzy or flat shadows. If the doubling disappears when you tilt the coin, it's likely machine doubling, which is common and usually not valuable. Never clean your coin. Cleaning can remove original surfaces and reduce value dramatically, even if the coin looks brighter afterward. Collectors prefer natural wear and toning. Now here's a surprising fact most people don't know. In 1981, The U.S. Mint also produced proof pennies in San Francisco using specially polished dies and planchets. These coins have mirror-like fields and frosted designs. While proof coins are not no mint mark, they carry an S. They remind us that 1981 was one of the last years of traditional copper proofs as well. Another fun detail, because copper prices were rising so fast in the early 1980s, the metal in a Pennies 1,982 penny was sometimes worth nearly as much as the coin's face value. This led to hoarding, melting attempts, and even legislation to prevent people from melting cents and nickels for profit. That makes the 1981 penny part of a much bigger story, not just about coins, but about economics, inflation, and how even the smallest piece of money reflects national change. Collectors also love the 1981 penny because it represents the end of consistency. After 1982, Lincoln cents would be made in both copper and zinc versions in the same year, creating confusion and new varieties. But 1981 stands as the last year when every regular issue penny was solid copper. That gives this coin a special place in collections focused on metal composition, transitional years, and the history of American coinage. Some collectors build full date-hand mint sets of Lincoln Memorial cents. Others focus only on copper issues. Some search specifically for high-grade examples from common years, known as condition rarities. In all of these collections, the 1981 no-mint mark penny often plays a quiet but important role. And then there's the thrill of the hunt. Because these pennies are still circulating, people can find them in pocket change, old jars, inherited collections, or rolls from banks. That means anyone, not just professional collectors, has a chance to discover something special. You don't need a metal detector, a treasure map, or a vault key. Sometimes all you need is curiosity and a few minutes to look closely at what's already in your hand. Imagine finding a bright red, nearly flawless 1981 penny tucked away in an old piggy bank, then discovering it's worth hundreds of dollars to the right collector. That's the magic of numismatics: history, value, and surprise all packed into something smaller than your thumbnail. So why do collectors still love the 1981 no-mint mark Lincoln penny today? Because it tells a story. It represents the final chapter of solid copper cents. It connects to economic changes in America. It offers the possibility of rare errors hiding in plain sight. And it reminds us that value isn't always obvious at first glance. Most people overlook pennies. They sit in drawers, cup holders, jars, and couch cushions, ignored and forgotten. But collectors know that sometimes the most ordinary-looking coins carry the most interesting stories, and occasionally the most unexpected value. The next time you see a penny dated 1981 with no mint mark, don't dismiss it. Hold it, look at it closely. Check its condition. Weigh it if you can. Study the letters and numbers. Because even though most are common, a small number are special, and those special ones are still out there, waiting to be found. And that's what makes this coin so fascinating. It's not about guaranteed riches. It's about possibility. It's about knowing that history is still circulating through our hands every day, often unnoticed. So if you've got a jar of pennies at home, maybe tonight is the night to pour them out and take a closer look. You never know what stories or surprises might be hiding among them. Imagine finding a penny in your pocket that looks completely ordinary, yet could quietly tell the story of America's economy, hidden minting secrets, and rare errors that collectors will pay real money to own. Today, we're uncovering the surprising truth behind the 1991 Lincoln penny, a coin most people overlook, but collectors never ignore. The 1991 Lincoln cent was struck at the Denver Mint, and the small letter D beneath the date tells us exactly where it was made. At first glance, this coin looks just like thousands of others from the late 20th century. Abraham Lincoln's familiar profile faces right, the Lincoln Memorial sits on the reverse, and the coin feels light, smooth, and coppery in your hand. But behind that simple design is a fascinating story, one that connects to rising metal prices, modern minting technology, and a few rare mistakes that turned everyday change into collector treasure. This coin was part of a long-running series of Lincoln cents that began in 1909, created to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. By 1991, the Lincoln cent had already been in circulation for more than 8 decades, making it the longest-running design in U.S. coin history. But the early 1990s were a turning point for the penny, and that's what makes this year especially interesting. In 1991, the United States was emerging from an economic slowdown, and inflation from the previous decade had pushed up the price of copper. This created a problem for the U.S. Mint. The metal inside each penny was starting to cost almost as much as the coin itself. To solve this, the Mint had already switched from solid copper cents to copper-plated zinc cents in 1982. By the time the 1991 D penny was struck, pennies were made of 97.5% zinc with a thin copper coating, only about 2.5% copper by weight. Even though they look copper, they're actually zinc at the core. This change made pennies cheaper to produce, but it also changed the way they age, corrode, and survive in circulation. Many people don't realize that modern pennies like the 1991 D are far more fragile than older copper cents. Drop one into water for too long, and the zinc core can corrode, causing bubbles, swelling, or even holes in the coin. That fragility plays a role in why well-preserved examples are more valuable than most people expect. In 1991, the Denver Mint produced over 4.1 billion Lincoln cents. That's billion with a B. That massive number means the 1991 D penny is not rare in general circulation. In fact, chances are very good that you've handled several of them without noticing. But in coin collecting, rarity doesn't always come from low production numbers. Sometimes it comes from condition, errors, or unusual variations, and that's where this coin starts to get interesting. The design of the 1991 D Lincoln penny follows the classic Lincoln Memorial reverse, which was first introduced in 1959 to mark Lincoln's 150th birthday. On the front, you'll see Victor David Brenner's famous portrait of Lincoln, originally created in 1909. Above Lincoln's head is the word Liberty. To the left is the motto In God We Trust. And below the date you'll find the small D mint mark, confirming it was struck in Denver. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial dominates the design, with the words United States of America across the top, EPLURIBUS UNUM above the memorial, and 1 cent at the bottom. If you look closely between the columns of the memorial, you can actually see a tiny seated statue of Lincoln inside. It's one of the few U.S. coins where the same person appears on both sides. Now here's where things get more intriguing. While most 1991 D pennies are worth only face value in everyday circulation, certain examples can be worth many times more, sometimes hundreds of dollars, depending on condition and minting errors. Let's start with condition. Coins are graded on a scale from worn and circulated to mint state, meaning they show no signs of wear and look almost exactly as they did when they left the mint. Because pennies are commonly used, tossed into jars, dropped on sidewalks, and scraped across countertops, truly pristine examples are surprisingly hard to find. A typical circulated 1991 D penny is worth 1 cent. But a high-grade uncirculated example, especially one graded MS67 or higher by professional grading services, can sell for anywhere from $50 to over $200, depending on color, strike quality, and eye appeal. Coins with bright red copper surfaces, known as red cents, are especially desirable because most modern pennies darken quickly after circulation. Now let's talk about errors, because this is where ordinary coins can become extraordinary. One of the most valuable errors known for the 1991 D Lincoln cent is the double die variety. This happens when the coin die receives multiple misaligned impressions during the manufacturing process, causing parts of the design to appear doubled. On certain 1991D doubled die cents, collectors look for doubling on Lincoln's ear, the date, or lettering like Liberty, and In God We Trust. Another fascinating error involves off-center strikes, where the blank coin planchet wasn't properly aligned when struck. This results in part of the design missing and the blank metal showing along the edge. Depending on how dramatic the error is and how much of the design remains visible, off-center 1991D cents can sell for $20 to over $100. Then there are clipped planchets, coins that were cut incorrectly from metal sheets, leaving curved or straight missing sections along the edge. These errors are highly collectible, and a genuine clipped 1991D penny can bring anywhere from $10 to $75 or more. Another unusual and valuable category includes broad strikes, where the coin was struck outside the retaining collar, causing it to spread wider than normal and lose its raised rim. These coins look slightly flattened and oversized, and collectors love them because they clearly show how minting machinery works when something goes wrong. And finally, there's the rarest and most exciting category, transitional metal errors. Occasionally, leftover copper planchets from earlier years accidentally made their way into later production runs. While this is extremely rare for the 1991D penny, any confirmed example struck on a solid copper planchet instead of copper-plated zinc would be worth thousands of dollars. These are exceptionally rare and require professional testing, but they're part of what keeps collectors checking their change. So how do we know these values are real? Let's look at some actual collector examples. In recent years, uncirculated 1991D pennies graded MS67 red have sold at auction for over $150. A sharply struck, blazing red example with no visible marks can spark bidding wars among registry set collectors trying to assemble top-ranked modern Lincoln cent collections. Off-center strikes from this year have sold between $40 and $120, depending on how dramatic the shift is. A well-centered off-strike showing a full date and mint mark can command especially strong prices. Clipped planchet errors have sold for $20 to $60, while doubled die varieties, when clearly identified and authenticated, can sell for $50 to several $100s, depending on the strength of the doubling and overall condition. These aren't fantasy numbers. These are real sales from collectors who understand that even modern coins can become valuable when the right factors come together. Now, let's talk about how to identify a real 1991D penny and avoid counterfeits or altered coins. First, check the date and mint mark. The coin should clearly read 1991 with a small d beneath the date on the front. If there's no mint mark, it was made in Philadelphia, not Denver. Next, weigh the coin. A genuine 1991D penny should weigh about 2.5 grams. If it weighs closer to 3.1 grams, it might be an older copper cent or possibly a wrong planchet error. But that requires professional verification. Use a magnifying glass to inspect the surfaces. Look for sharp lettering, clean details in Lincoln's hair and beard, and smooth, original surfaces. Be cautious of coins that look unusually shiny but lack sharp detail, as they may have been cleaned or polished, which lowers collector value. For error coins, look for clear and natural abnormalities. Real mint errors usually show smooth metal flow, rounded edges on mistakes, and natural-looking distortions. Damage caused after the coin left the mint, like dents, scratches, or corrosion, does not add value and is often mistaken for errors by beginners. If you believe you found something special, it's always best to have the coin examined by a professional coin dealer or certified grading service. That's the only way to confirm authenticity and maximize resale value. Now let's explore some fun and surprising facts about the 1991D Lincoln penny. In 1991, More pennies were produced in Denver than the population of the United States at the time, meaning there were enough new Denver cents for every American to receive more than 16 brand new pennies that year alone. Despite their low value, modern pennies like the 1991 D actually cost more to produce than 1 cent. For years, the U.S. Mint has spent over 2 cents to make each penny, sparking ongoing debates about whether the penny should be eliminated entirely from circulation. Another interesting fact is that zinc-based pennies like this one can corrode internally without showing damage on the surface. That means two coins that look identical on the outside could have very different conditions on the inside, one solid and collectible, the other fragile and decaying. And even though billions were made, fewer than a tiny fraction survive in true gem mint state today. Most were quickly worn down in circulation, making pristine examples far scarcer than their production numbers suggest. So why do collectors love the 1991 D penny? Part of the appeal is accessibility. Unlike rare gold coins or early American silver dollars, this coin is affordable, familiar, and easy to find. Anyone can start searching through pocket change, jars, rolls from the bank, or old family collections and realistically hope to discover something valuable. Another reason is the thrill of error hunting. Modern Lincoln cents are some of the most studied coins in the hobby, and collectors enjoy searching for doubled dies, off-center strikes, and unusual planchet errors. The 1991 D penny represents a time when minting technology was advanced enough to produce massive quantities, yet still imperfect enough to create collectible mistakes. Collectors also appreciate this coin as part of the broader Lincoln cent story. From the first 1909 issues to the steel cents of World War II to the modern zinc era, the Lincoln penny reflects America's economic history, technological changes, and evolving culture. The 1991 D penny sits right in the middle of that story, modern but not too modern, common, yet full of potential surprises. And for many people, there's something powerful about the idea that a simple coin worth 1 cent could be hiding a story, a history, or even real financial value. It reminds us that treasure doesn't always come in gold bars or rare gemstones. Sometimes, it's already sitting quietly in your pocket. So the next time you see a 1991 D Lincoln penny, don't dismiss it. Turn it over. Look closely at the details. Check the date, the mint mark, the surfaces, and the strike. Because while most of these coins are ordinary, a few are anything but, and the difference between 1 cent and $100 can come down to the smallest details. Coins like this prove that history isn't locked away in museums or behind glass cases. It's moving through our hands every day, one penny at a time. And who knows, the next time you reach into your change jar, the coin you pull out might not just buy you a piece of candy. It might just tell a story worth far more than its face value. Most people would walk past this penny without giving it a second glance. But what if I told you that a small copper coin from 1997, struck in Denver, could quietly be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars, depending on one tiny detail? Today, we're uncovering the real story behind the 1997 D Lincoln penny, a coin millions of Americans have held, but very few truly understand. This coin is officially known as the 1997 D Lincoln Memorial Cent. The D mint mark means it was made at the Denver Mint, one of the main coin-producing facilities in the United States. At first glance, it looks just like any other penny from the late 20th century. Abraham Lincoln on the front, the Lincoln Memorial on the back, and a familiar copper color. But beneath that ordinary appearance is a fascinating story of modern minting, hidden errors, collector demand, and rare variations that have turned some of these everyday coins into serious collector prizes. To understand this coin, we need to go back to the year 1997 itself. America was in the middle of a booming economy. The internet was becoming mainstream, cell phones were shrinking, and the U.S. Mint was producing billions of coins every year to keep up with growing commerce. The Lincoln cent had already been in circulation for nearly 90 years, first introduced in 1909 to honor Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday. By 1997, it had become one of the longest-running coin designs in American history. The Denver Mint struck over 3.2 billion Lincoln pennies in 1997. That number alone tells you something important. This was not meant to be a rare coin. It was designed for everyday use, to be tossed into jars, pockets, cash registers, and glove compartments across the country. And for most people, that's exactly where it ended up. But as collectors know, rarity in coins isn't always about how many were made. Sometimes, it's about how many survived in perfect condition, or how many were struck with unusual mistakes. Let's take a closer look at what this penny is actually made of. Starting in 1982, the U.S. Mint changed the penny's composition from mostly copper to zinc with a thin copper coating. So the 1997 D penny weighs about 2.5 grams and is made of 97.5% zinc and 2.5% copper plating. That change saved the government millions in production costs, but it also introduced new challenges, including plating errors, weak strikes, and surface issues that collectors watch closely today. On the front or obverse, you'll see Victor David Brenner's famous portrait of Abraham Lincoln, a design that has been used since 1909. Above Lincoln's head is the motto, "In God We Trust." In front of his face is the word liberty, and just behind his shoulder is the date, 1997, with a small D mint mark beneath it, showing it was struck in Denver. On the reverse, you'll see the Lincoln Memorial, which was used on pennies from 1959 through 2008. If you look closely between the columns, you can actually see a tiny statue of Lincoln seated inside the memorial. Above the building is the phrase United States of America, and below it is 1 cent. Across the top curve is the Latin motto E pluribus unum, meaning out of many one. So far, everything sounds normal. And for most 1997 D pennies, that's exactly what they are: normal, common coins worth just 1 cent. But the excitement around this coin comes from something collectors always hunt for: mint errors and high-grade survivors. One of the most famous and valuable varieties connected to 1997 pennies is not actually from Denver, but it made collectors start paying closer attention to this year. In Philadelphia, a rare double-die obverse error was discovered on some 1997 cents, where the lettering appeared doubled, especially on "In God We Trust" and "Liberty." Those coins have sold for thousands of dollars. While that specific double die is not known on the Denver version, collectors began examining all 1997 cents more closely. And that's where Denver minted errors began surfacing. Some 1997 D pennies show off-center strikes, where the design is not properly centered on the coin blank. Others display die cracks, clipped planchets, weak strikes, or missing details. One especially interesting error is the broad strike, where the coin is struck outside the retaining collar, making it wider than normal with no raised rim. These error coins can be worth anywhere from $20 to several $100s, depending on how dramatic the mistake is and how well preserved the coin remains. Then there are double dies. While major double die varieties are rare for the Denver Mint in 1997, minor doubling on letters, numbers, or Lincoln's features has been reported by collectors. These are usually subtle and require magnification to see, but in high-grade condition, they can still bring strong premiums from error specialists. But errors aren't the only way a 1997 D penny becomes valuable. Condition plays a huge role. Most pennies from the 1990s were heavily circulated and quickly developed scratches, stains, and wear. Finding one in pristine condition, especially with original mint luster and no visible marks, is surprisingly difficult. These coins are graded on a scale from 1 to 70, with 70 being a perfect coin. For modern cents, anything graded MS67 or higher is considered extremely rare. In recent years, Certified examples of the 1997 D Lincoln penny, graded MS67 red, meaning full original copper color with no wear, have sold for impressive prices. One auction example sold for over $400. Another high-grade specimen reportedly crossed the $500 mark. These values might surprise people who think modern pennies can't be valuable, but condition rarity changes everything. When billions of coins are made, only a tiny fraction survive in flawless shape. Now let's talk about what makes collectors excited when they search through rolls of pennies or old jars. It's the possibility of finding something special hiding in plain sight. The 1997 D penny represents that perfectly. On the surface, it's ordinary, but under magnification, some examples reveal strange details, doubling in the lettering, unusual textures, or errors from damaged dies. Each of these variations tells a story about what happened at the mint during production. One real-world example involved a 1997 D penny struck on a clipped planchet, meaning a piece of metal was missing from the edge before the coin was struck. This coin sold for over $100. Another example with a dramatic off-center strike, where part of Lincoln's face was missing, sold for more than $200. These coins were not special when they left the mint. They were meant to be destroyed. But somehow, they slipped into circulation, survived for years, and were eventually discovered by collectors who recognized their value. So how can you tell if your 1997 D penny is worth more than 1 cent? The first step is looking at the condition. Is the coin bright and shiny or dull and worn? Does Lincoln's hair show sharp detail or is it flat and smooth? Are there deep scratches, spots, or discoloration? High-quality coins have strong details, smooth surfaces, and full luster. Next, look closely at the date and lettering. Use a magnifying glass or your phone's zoom feature. Check for doubling on "In God We Trust," "Liberty," and the numbers in 1997. True doubling will look like two distinct impressions, not blurry edges or shadows. Also examine the rim. Is it